Your Honor, 8-year-old Marcus Williams said, his voice cutting through the silence of Courtroom 4B like a blade. My opponent's legal argument contains 17 constitutional violations and 12 procedural errors that render his entire case inadmissible under Illinois family law. The seasoned judge's mouth fell open. Reporters in the gallery stopped writing. Harvard-educated lawyers froze mid-breath. The opposing counsel, David Steinberg, dropped his pen. Furthermore, Marcus continued, standing on his wooden crate with the confidence of a Supreme Court justice, Section 602.7 of the Illinois Marriage and Dissolution of Marriage Act explicitly states that economic factors cannot supersede established emotional bonds when determining a child's best interests. My opponent just spent 30 minutes arguing the exact opposite. Steinberg's face turned red. Judge Thornton leaned forward, her eyes wide with disbelief. The packed courtroom was so quiet you could hear hearts beating. I have here, Marcus said, lifting a thick folder, 43 case precedents that directly contradict every legal claim made by the petitioner. I also have evidence that this entire custody petition is built on fraud. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. A reporter whispered urgently into her phone. The court stenographer's fingers trembled over her keys. But before I dismantle their case piece by piece, Marcus announced, his 8-year-old voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty, I need to tell you how I ended up fighting for my life in this courtroom. The answer began 3 months earlier, when Marcus first discovered that his world was about to be torn apart. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Because tomorrow, at the same time, we'll bring you another story of Black people leading the way that you won't want to miss. Marcus Williams had always been different. While other kids his age were playing video games or watching cartoons, he spent hours in the public library, devouring books on everything from astronomy to ancient history. But it was the dusty legal textbooks on the top shelf that captured his imagination most. His grandmother, Rose Williams, had raised him since he was 3 after his parents died in a car accident. She worked double shifts at the hospital to keep food on the table and never missed a parent-teacher conference. Rose was his world, his anchor, his everything. That Tuesday afternoon in September, Marcus came home from school to find his grandmother sitting at their small kitchen table, tears streaming down her face. In her trembling hands was a legal document with bold letters across the top, Petition for Custody Modification. What's wrong, Grandma Rose? Marcus asked, dropping his backpack by the door. Rose tried to wipe her eyes, but the tears kept coming. Baby, your Uncle Jerome, he's trying to take you away from me. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Uncle Jerome was his father's brother, a man who had shown up to exactly 2 family gatherings in Marcus's entire life. He lived in a mansion across town, drove expensive cars, and had never so much as sent a birthday card. He says I'm too old to take care of you properly, Rose continued, her voice breaking. Says you need a stable home environment with someone who can provide for your future. Marcus grabbed the document from her hands, his eyes scanning the legal jargon. Most 8-year-olds would see meaningless words, but Marcus had spent countless hours reading legal texts. He understood every devastating word. Grandma, this says he's claiming you're financially unfit and that your age makes you an unsuitable guardian. Marcus's voice was steady, but his heart was racing. He wants full custody within 60 days. Rose nodded, unable to speak. What did the lawyer say? Marcus asked. Honey, we can't afford a lawyer. The court will assign someone. But Rose's voice trailed off. They both knew what that meant. An overworked public defender who would spend maybe 30 minutes preparing their case against Jerome's high-powered legal team. That night, Marcus lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. He had read enough legal cases to know that custody battles often came down to one thing: money. Jerome had it. They didn't. In the eyes of the court, that might be enough to tear apart the only family Marcus had ever known. But as he drifted off to sleep, an idea began to form. An impossible, crazy idea that just might work. What if he could represent himself? The next morning, Marcus walked into the Chicago Public Library with a determination that surprised even the librarians who knew him well. He had exactly 58 days to master family law, custody statutes, and courtroom procedure. Mrs. Patterson, he said to the head librarian, I need every book you have on family law, child custody cases, and legal representation. Mrs. Patterson, a kind woman in her 50s who had watched Marcus grow up among the stacks, raised an eyebrow. "That's quite a request, young man. Working on a school project?" "Something like that," Marcus replied, not wanting to explain the full truth. For the next 3 weeks, Marcus lived at the library. He studied Illinois family law statutes, memorized custody evaluation criteria, and read hundreds of case precedents. He learned about the best interests of the child standard, parental fitness evaluations, and the rights of guardians versus biological family members. But reading about the law and practicing it were two different things. Marcus knew he needed real courtroom experience, so he began attending public hearings during his lunch breaks. He watched lawyers argue, studied how judges responded to different approaches, and took careful notes on what worked and what didn't. At home, he practiced his arguments in front of the bathroom mirror, timing himself and refining his delivery. Rose watched with a mixture of pride and heartbreak, knowing her grandson was fighting a battle no child should have to fight. "Marcus, baby, you don't have to do this," she said one evening, as he worked on his legal brief at the kitchen table. "We'll figure something else out." "Grandma, I've read 37 similar cases in the past month," Marcus replied without looking up from his work. In every single one where the child's voice was heard directly, the court gave significant weight to their testimony. "I'm not just fighting for us. I'm fighting for every kid who's ever been treated like property in a custody battle." Rose squeezed his shoulder, marveling at the wisdom in her grandson's words. 2 weeks before the hearing, Marcus filed a motion with the court, requesting to represent himself. The clerk looked confused. The judge's secretary called twice to confirm it wasn't a joke, and Jerome's lawyer, David Steinberg, laughed when he heard the news. "A kid wants to play lawyer?" Steinberg told his team. This just got easier. But Marcus wasn't playing. He had discovered something that would change everything. A legal precedent that Jerome's expensive lawyers had overlooked. A case from 1987 that could blow their entire argument apart. The question was, would the court listen to an 8-year-old long enough to hear it? The day of the hearing arrived with an unexpected media circus. Word had leaked that an 8-year-old was representing himself in a custody case, and reporters packed the courthouse hallway. Marcus walked through the crowd, holding his grandmother's hand, a small briefcase in his other hand containing everything he needed to save his family. Judge Margaret Thornton, a stern woman with silver hair and 30 years of experience, called the court to order. She looked down at Marcus with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Young man, I understand you wish to represent yourself in this matter. Are you certain you understand the gravity of these proceedings?" Marcus stood on his wooden crate, making himself tall enough to address the court properly. "Yes, Your Honor. I've studied Illinois family law, particularly Section 602.7 of the Illinois Marriage and Dissolution of Marriage Act, and I understand my rights under the Children's Best Interest Standard." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Thornton's eyebrows rose slightly. "Very well. Mr. Steinberg, you may present your case." Jerome's lawyer stood confidently, his expensive suit perfectly tailored, his argument rehearsed to perfection. "Your Honor, my client Jerome Williams seeks custody of his nephew Marcus, based on his superior financial resources, stable home environment, and ability to provide educational opportunities that the current guardian simply cannot match." Steinberg presented tax returns showing Jerome's 7-figure income, photos of his 6-bedroom house with a swimming pool, and letters from prestigious private schools willing to accept Marcus immediately. The petitioner's grandmother, while well-intentioned, is 73 years old, works multiple jobs to make ends meet, and lives in a neighborhood with failing schools and high crime rates. The child deserves better than survival. He deserves to thrive. The presentation was polished, professional, and devastating. Rose felt her heart sink as she watched the judge taking notes. Then it was Marcus's turn. "Your Honor," Marcus began, his voice clear and steady, "my uncle's lawyer just made an excellent argument for why money matters more than love. But I'd like to discuss something more important, the law." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. In 1987, the Illinois Supreme Court ruled in Henderson v. Henderson that custody decisions cannot be based primarily on economic factors when the current guardian provides adequate care and emotional stability. The court specifically stated that a child's best interests encompass emotional, psychological, and developmental needs that cannot be measured in dollars. Judge Thornton leaned forward, clearly surprised by the 8-year-old's legal knowledge. Furthermore, Marcus continued, my uncle's petition fails to address the most crucial factor in custody determination, the existing bond between child and guardian. Illinois Statute 602.7(3) requires the court to consider the child's adjustment to his home, school, and community. Marcus pulled out a stack of papers. I've brought evidence that my uncle's lawyers didn't bother to gather. What happened next would shock everyone in that courtroom. Marcus methodically presented his case with the precision of a seasoned attorney. He called his first witness, Mrs. Patricia Reeves, his third-grade teacher. Mrs. Reeves, Marcus said, can you tell the court about my academic performance and emotional well-being? Marcus is the most exceptional student I've encountered in 23 years of teaching. Mrs. Reeves testified, he reads at a high school level. His emotional maturity is remarkable, and he consistently demonstrates leadership skills. Most importantly, he talks about his grandmother with such love and respect. She's clearly the anchor in his life. Marcus then called Dr. James Mitchell, a child psychologist who had evaluated him at the court's request. Dr. Mitchell, in your professional opinion, what would be the psychological impact of removing me from my grandmother's care? Devastating, Dr. Mitchell replied without hesitation. The bond between Marcus and his grandmother is extraordinarily strong. Severing that relationship would constitute psychological trauma that could affect him for years to come. But Marcus's most powerful evidence came next. He presented a detailed financial analysis that he had prepared himself, showing how his grandmother's modest income was actually sufficient for his needs. Your Honor, my uncle's lawyers suggest that money equals love. But let me show you what love actually looks like in dollars and cents. Marcus walked to an easel and displayed a chart he had created. My grandmother spends 18% of her income on my education books, supplies, library fees. She spends 12% on my healthcare, including dental and vision care. She's saved $2,000 for my college fund by setting aside $25 every month for the past 6 years. The courtroom was silent as Marcus continued. My uncle, despite earning 40 times more than my grandmother, has contributed exactly $0 to my care, education, or well-being in the past 8 years. He missed my school plays, my science fair, and every birthday except one. He doesn't know that I'm allergic to peanuts, that I want to be a lawyer, or that I can read Latin. Marcus turned to face his uncle directly for the first time. Uncle Jerome, you say you want to provide for my future, but you've never been part of my present. You don't know me, and I don't know you. How can you claim to act in my best interests when you don't even know what my interests are? Jerome shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. But the most important evidence, Marcus said, turning back to the judge, is something that can't be measured or quantified. It's the fact that my grandmother, Rose Williams, has loved me unconditionally every single day of my life. She taught me to read, to think, to question, and to stand up for what's right. She's the reason I'm standing here today, capable of defending myself. Marcus paused, letting his words sink in. Your Honor, I'm not asking you to choose between rich and poor. I'm asking you to choose between a stranger with money and a grandmother with love. I'm asking you to choose between disruption and stability, between uncertainty and security, between someone who sees me as an obligation and someone who sees me as a blessing. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Even the court reporter had stopped typing. Then Marcus played his final card, the one that would change everything. Your Honor, there's one more thing, Marcus said, his voice steady, despite the magnitude of what he was about to reveal. Something my uncle's lawyers failed to investigate before filing this petition. He pulled out a manila folder and approached the bench. I've discovered that my uncle's motivation for seeking custody isn't love or concern for my welfare. It's money. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Jerome's face went pale. 3 months ago, I gained access to my parents' life insurance policy documents through a Freedom of Information Act request. My parents had a $2 million policy that I inherit when I turn 18. However, if I'm in the care of a blood relative rather than a non-blood guardian, that relative gains control of the policy's investment decisions and can access the funds for my educational and welfare expenses. Judge Thornton's expression hardened as she examined the documents Marcus had provided. My grandmother, as a non-blood guardian, has no access to these funds. She's been raising me on her own income, never touching a penny of my inheritance. But a blood relative like my uncle would have significant control over that money. Marcus turned to address the courtroom. I hired a private investigator with money I earned tutoring other kids. This wasn't entirely true. Mrs. Patterson had helped him contact an investigator who worked pro bono for interesting cases. The investigation revealed that my uncle's business is in serious financial trouble. He's facing bankruptcy and needs access to liquid assets immediately. The private investigator, a woman named Sarah Chen, stood up in the gallery. Your Honor, if I may be sworn in, I have evidence that will substantiate these claims. Judge Thornton nodded, and Sarah Chen took the witness stand. I conducted a comprehensive financial investigation of Jerome Williams, Chen testified. His construction company owes $1.8 million to various creditors. He's been served with foreclosure notices on both his home and business properties. He needs immediate access to substantial funds or he'll lose everything within 6 months. Marcus retrieved a document from his briefcase. This is a loan application my uncle filed 2 weeks ago, requesting a $2 million business loan. He listed future access to family trust funds as collateral. The timing of this custody petition is not coincidental, it's calculated. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Jerome's lawyer frantically shuffled through papers, clearly caught off guard. Your Honor, Marcus continued, my uncle isn't trying to save me, he's trying to save himself, at my expense. Judge Thornton called for order, her gavel echoing through the silent courtroom. Mr. Steinberg, did you know about your client's financial situation when you filed this petition? Steinberg's face was red with embarrassment. Your Honor, we were not made aware of these circumstances. And Mr. Jerome Williams, the judge said, her voice icy, do you care to explain why you failed to disclose your financial motivations to the court? Jerome stood slowly, his earlier confidence completely gone. Your Honor, my business difficulties don't change the fact that I can provide better opportunities for Marcus than his grandmother can. By using his inheritance to fund your failing business? Judge Thornton's question cut through the courtroom like a blade. The silence that followed was deafening. Jerome had no answer. Marcus stepped forward one final time. Your Honor, this case isn't about what's best for me. It's about what's best for my uncle's bank account. I ask the court to consider not just the law, but justice. Not just the money, but the love. Not just the future, but the present. What Judge Thornton said next would be remembered in legal circles for years to come. Judge Margaret Thornton removed her glasses and looked directly at Marcus Williams. In 30 years on the bench, she had never encountered a case quite like this one. Young man, approach the bench, she said quietly. Marcus walked forward, his small frame dwarfed by the massive courtroom, but his presence somehow filling the entire space. Marcus, in all my years as a judge, I have never seen a child advocate for himself with such skill, preparation, and maturity. You have demonstrated not only an understanding of the law, but a wisdom that many adults lack. She turned to address the full courtroom. This case has presented the court with a clear choice between financial resources and family bonds, between legal manipulation and genuine care, between self-interest and a child's best interests. Judge Thornton picked up the custody petition and held it in front of her. Mr. Jerome Williams, your petition for custody is not only denied, it is dismissed with prejudice, meaning you cannot refile without extraordinary circumstances. Furthermore, I am ordering an investigation into your financial motivations and potential perjury in these proceedings. The courtroom erupted in applause, but Judge Thornton wasn't finished. Mrs. Rose Williams, your guardianship is not only confirmed but strengthened. I am granting you full legal custody with all parental rights, making any future challenges significantly more difficult. Rose Williams burst into tears, covering her face with her hands as the reality sank in. But most importantly, Judge Thornton continued, I want to address something that has become clear during these proceedings. Marcus Williams, you have demonstrated exceptional legal ability, but more than that, you have shown character, integrity, and a profound understanding of justice. She paused, letting her words carry weight. I am recommending that you be admitted to the Illinois Bar Association's Young Scholars Program, which will provide you with mentorship and resources to continue your legal education. Additionally, I am establishing a scholarship fund in your name for children who show exceptional promise despite financial hardship." The courtroom erupted again, but Judge Thornton held up her hand for silence. "Finally, I want to say something to every person in this courtroom, and everyone who will hear about this case. Today, an 8-year-old boy has reminded us that the law is not about money or power or manipulation. It's about justice, truth, and protecting those who cannot protect themselves." She looked directly at Marcus. "You have not only won your case, you have restored my faith in why I became a judge in the first place." As the gavel fell, Marcus turned to his grandmother, who swept him into her arms. The reporters rushed forward, but Marcus had only one thing to say. "I just wanted to stay with my grandma," he said simply. But the story was far from over. 6 months later, Marcus Williams stood at the podium of the Illinois State Bar Association's annual conference, the youngest speaker in the organization's history. The auditorium was packed with lawyers, judges, and legal scholars who had come to hear the boy who had revolutionized how the legal community thought about child advocacy. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the large hall. "6 months ago, I stood in a courtroom fighting for my right to stay with the only family I've ever known. Today, I stand here as proof that justice isn't about age, money, or connections. It's about truth, preparation, and the courage to speak up for what's right." The audience was silent, hanging on every word. But I didn't win my case alone. I won because my grandmother Rose Williams taught me that love is stronger than money, that family is stronger than greed, and that truth is stronger than lies. I won because librarians like Mrs. Patterson believed in me and gave me access to knowledge. I won because professionals like Dr. Mitchell and Sarah Chen were willing to stand up for a child they barely knew. Marcus paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "Since my case, I've received over 1,000 letters from children in similar situations. Kids who are being fought over like property, who have no voice in decisions that will shape their entire lives. That's why I'm here today, not to celebrate my victory, but to challenge all of you to do better." He pulled out a folder thick with papers. "I'm proposing the Williams Amendment to Illinois Family Law, provision that would require courts to hear directly from any child over the age of 7 in custody proceedings, and to provide legal representation for children whose interests diverge from both parties." The applause was thunderous, but Marcus wasn't finished. "My uncle Jerome, by the way, was convicted of attempted fraud and is serving community service. He lost his business, but he wrote me a letter last month, apologizing and asking if we could have a relationship based on honesty instead of money. We're taking it slow, but people can change." Marcus smiled, showing that despite everything he'd been through, he was still an 8-year-old boy. "My grandmother Rose is here today," he said, gesturing to the front row where Rose sat beaming with pride. "She's taking college courses now. Says if her grandson can be a lawyer, she can get her degree too. She's 74 and getting straight A's." The audience erupted in another standing ovation. In conclusion, I want to leave you with this thought. The law is not just words on paper. It's the promise we make to each other that justice will prevail, that truth will matter, and that even the smallest voice can change the world. Marcus closed his folder and looked directly at the audience. "Thank you for listening to me today. Thank you for believing that an 8-year-old can make a difference. And thank you for proving that when we stand together for what's right, nobody, no matter how small, stands alone." As the standing ovation continued, Marcus Williams looked out at the crowd of legal professionals who had come to hear him speak. He thought about the scared boy who had discovered a custody petition on his grandmother's kitchen table just 8 months ago, and he smiled. He had saved his family, changed the law, and inspired a generation of young advocates. But most importantly, he had proven that justice wasn't about money or power. It was about having the courage to stand up and speak the truth. The 8-year-old legal genius had shocked the courtroom, but his real victory was showing the world that sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest power. And his story was just beginning.